There we go. Um, we will send a copy of the slide deck and a recording to everybody who registered. So it often takes us a few days to get all that in place and sent out in an email to everybody. But so if you're patient, you should get a copy of both the recording of this workshop and the slide deck. The slide deck does have a number of links in it, so the PDF of the slide deck may be of interest to you when the time comes. So, meanwhile, uh, this is Staying in Business, and we are sponsored by the TD Charitable Foundation today. Thank you to them for making so many of our workshops possible. We are also partially supported by the Small Business Administration, and then we are a national organization as well. So the SCORE Foundation also provides some support to us. Turning to today's topic, staying in business is perhaps a little more challenging for many businesses today than it might normally be. And so I have adapted the slide deck I used from the last time I made this presentation to reflect more of the things that we encountered today. I want to start with one thing, which is as we go through this presentation, we're going to get into a bunch of details, but don't let the details get in the way of keeping your major goals in mind for your business. What's most important for most small business owners is why are you doing this? And then secondly, how you're doing it. And the third is what you're actually doing. So the why is often what helps you keep getting out of bed in the morning to tackle what needs to be tackled for your business. The how is the details you're figuring out, and the what is the stuff that you may actually be doing from day to day for your customers. So all of that is something to keep in the back of your thinking as you negotiate what it is you want to do with your business going forward. Secondly, your business is a lot more than your product or your service. It consists of your processes, your policies, the particular equipment you may be using, the capital that you raise to invest in your business, the employees that you may have, the vendors you use, the software you use. All of those are important components of your business. And any or all of these may be things that need to evolve over time. And sometimes external changes that you may perceive as a crisis for your business becomes an opportunity to make changes in some of these areas that can put you in a stronger position over the long term. So there's a saying, don't waste a good crisis. And the same is true when you look at all of these elements of your business in light of the challenges you may be facing at the moment. Don't forget that as a business owner, you have a number of hats to wear on a daily basis and weekly basis and monthly basis. First of all, you are probably the primary salesperson for your product or your services. Yes, you may have others selling for you at times, but major customers are probably going to want to meet the owner at some point. You may be doing a lot of the marketing for your business as well. In many businesses, it's the name and the personality of the founder that serve as a basis for a lot of the marketing the business does. However, you also need to be the person who's building and managing your team that delivers your product or services to your clients. You are the one who needs to make sure that your processes work, that they're reasonably efficient, that they're reasonably reliable, that they're cost effective, that they work for you and your staff. And you are the one ultimately who has to monitor your financials. You may have a bookkeeper, you may have an accountant, but you need to be looking at your financials regularly as an early warning sign in case things are not going as you had hoped or expected. And then lastly, as the owner of the business, it falls upon you to raise funds for your business. If your business is going to need more money, then you need to identify that hopefully early and do what needs to be done to go about raising it, whether that be in the form of investing additional capital of yours in the business, um, getting a bank loan or a line of credit, finding investors for the business, or perhaps even finding grants if they exist for your business. So these are all roles that fall largely on the shoulders of the owner of a business, not just when they're in startup phase, but throughout the life of the business. So uh, it would be helpful to me in what follows if you could perhaps add to the chat window uh, what's driving you to participate in this workshop today. What are your major business concerns for your business today? You don't have to get into all the details, but just sort of briefly in one or two sentences, if you could add to the chat window something about what's most concerning to you now. I have some guesses, obviously, that went into the slides I put together for this, but if you have things that I've not otherwise addressed in the slides, I will try to touch upon them. So please add those to the chat window, and I will take a look at that periodically. Also, you will see slides like this periodically during this workshop where I'm asking you to share your experiences. I'm very interested in it myself, but in addition to that, the fellow attendees may also appreciate hearing, for example, that, oh, somebody else has the same problem I do, kind of thing. Often, while it may not solve the problem, it helps you feel a little better about it, that, oh, it's not just me that's experiencing this. So whenever you see this clippy like question mark on the left, I'm inviting you to add something to the chat window describing stuff that we've just talked about. So I see just starting up, concerned about the economy in the next year and the inconsistent changes, hard to predict in your future, never mind the more distant future. I agree with that 100%. Okay. So we'll talk about 6 major topics today. The first is, has your market evolved? And you can see the rest here. We'll touch upon them as we get to them. The first risk that most people face from year to year is that their market has changed a bit from what it might have been a year ago. So it never hurts to periodically, maybe once a year or so, revisit the attributes that your customers have in common. In part because while you may have defined all of this as you started up your business, for example, as you gain more and more experience selling to your customers, you get to have a better and better sense of who they really are. And therefore, it is always worth re-examining your customer personas to make sure that they're still accurate. Now, if you're in a consumer business, that means you're re-examining is the age range what you expected to be selling to? Is the gender predominantly what you expected to be selling to? What about income range or the geographic area they live in or the life stage they're in or their occupation, interests, hobbies or their politics or causes or goals? All of those are things that could affect your successfully identifying the market that you wish to market to. And if you, as you learn more about your customers, you realize, ooh, I didn't quite have that right, it's worth circling back to make sure that your future marketing is correctly addressing the market that you wish to serve. I see Marnie says the economy's had a huge effect on a business that's been around for 5 years, concerned with sustainability. So ask yourself if any of the attributes of your customer persona have shifted over the past year since you last re-examined things. And also ask yourself if any of your steady customers have changed their purchasing patterns. If you see steady customers behaving differently, then that's something that's often very useful to catch earlier rather than later. Now, if you sell mostly to other businesses, not to consumers, then you would be looking at a very different set of attributes, perhaps, for your customers. What industries are they in? What nationalities are they? Uh, what are their service needs in addition to any products they might buy from you, or vice versa? What are their product needs in addition to services they buy from you? Have their price requirements changed? Are they asking you for better prices? Or perhaps they've started asking for terms. Will you let them pay in 2 weeks or 30 days instead of upon placing the order? And in some cases, your customers might be asking you for either more or less value added. They might be saying, gee, I'd love it if you could unbundle some things that you're offering, or alternatively saying, hey, can you do more for me than you have been because I don't want to have to worry about integrating the thing I have been buying with you with the next step. Could you do both for me? So once again, have you seen your primary customers tending to ask different kinds of things of you now than they were, say, a year ago or 6 months ago? And have they changed their purchasing patterns? Those are some huge clues that maybe you want to re-examine your definition of the market you're serving and the way you're marketing to them. So, another question for you. What market changes have you faced? Once again, if you could let me know, that'd be helpful. I'm going to go on for a bit here talking about value propositions, but that'll give you a chance to answer this question in the chat while I discuss value propositions at a bit more length. So your value proposition, if you're not familiar with this, is a brief statement that describes the market you serve, the product or service you're offering, why people should buy you instead of the competition. In effect, it's a brief summary of the value you provide to your customer. And hopefully that value will be greater than the price that you charge, which is what makes them willing to buy it from you instead of doing it themselves. Now, if you've developed a value proposition already, then ask yourself whether you've truly reflected that statement in your marketing messages, and ask yourself whether your markets have evolved since you developed it, in which case maybe you need to go back and tweak it a bit now. And note that if you are actually serving multiple market segments, then you may need to have a separate value proposition for each of your market segments. And if you're not familiar with value propositions, well, the links on the bottom of this page give you some great resources that are out on the internet there on how to go about developing or refining your value proposition. Just for what it's worth, I am never happy with the value proposition I've written. I always have to go back and tweak it every time I look at it. But at some point, it's good enough, and you just got to run with it. But I say that just to say that it isn't always easy, but it's always been a worthwhile effort. Recall that the greatest value information is going to be the exposure you have had to your customers. And a good value proposition will take the perspective of your customer, not you. What is it that they value about your product or service? I'm sure you have a long list of things that you think they might value. That's nice, but what's most important in your marketing is that you speak to their needs and their terms. And so understanding what they value is what is absolutely critical in a value proposition. So, see a couple more things here in the chat. Um, I've seen local businesses pulling back on investments in staffing. Lack of affordable workforce and workforce housing does not help. Yes, those are definite, commonly shared challenges, and everybody is worried about what's going to happen with the economy at the moment. Um, so, second major topic, does your supply chain need to evolve as a result of changes going on around you? So I'll start off with a question here for you again. What supply chain concerns do you face? Please describe them briefly in the chat. And meanwhile, I'll start talking about the ones that I envision some people might be facing. The first question is, have external factors forced you to reconsider your supply chain? Now, what does that mean? Well, I'm thinking tariffs could impact the price that you end up having to pay to get things into inventory. But you could also find that delivery times have been affected. And you could also find that the countries that you may have been sourcing some things from may need to change because they've fallen out of favor with our government. So all of those things are things which have always been an issue to some extent, but have become a much more significant issue in the past 3 months. So ask yourself whether critical supplies that you depend on could be sourced from a diversity of sources. In other words, yes, you might get a slightly cheaper price buying in bulk from one supplier, but might you be better off doing what a lot of the large car companies say do, which is buying 60% of what they buy from the supplier who gives them the best price and 40% of it from the supplier that gives them the next best price. And that way, if their major supplier all of a sudden changes their terms or has supply issues, they can go to number two without batting an eyelash because they already have existing regular orders with them. They're a known quantity. And the fact that they're an existing regular customer probably gives them a bit more leverage with that supplier. Secondly, if you're finding that availability of products that you depend on is reduced, or if you're finding that the landed costs of those products have risen, not just due to tariffs, but also due to transportation costs or pricing changes, can you find alternatives? And those alternatives might be from different countries, from different suppliers. You might even find that for some things, you can take a completely different kind of product that would also meet the need. Maybe you are going to look at totally changing what you deliver by changing some of the products you depend on instead of just finding a replacement for the product that you depended on. And your country of origin is now a greater risk factor than it necessarily was 6 months ago. Unfortunately, there's very little clarity yet as to where that's heading. We can all make guesses as to which countries may or may not negotiate away some tariffs. Not all tariffs are new. We've always had existing tariffs from some countries and on some products. The new tariffs are just being added on top of those and potentially slowing down the process of getting through a customs broker in the process. So all of those are things that may be new concerns, particularly if you're sourcing from abroad, But even if you're sourcing from a domestic supplier, you may find that they have been supplying from abroad. And the result is that all of the stuff that you didn't feel was affecting you is affecting you because your supplier is sourcing from a country that all of a sudden is coming under scrutiny. Another possibility is to reconsider the make versus buy question. If you have products that you've always been buying and reselling, maybe you want to start considering making it yourself. Um, well, if it's not going to reduce risks to supply or cost, then no, it may not be worth making it yourself. But it's worth asking the question of would you even consider making it yourself to resell it? Or alternatively, would your competitors in your industry perhaps consider working together with you to establish a new supplier for this product that you all need, but that none of you want to make? Um, as an example, I might say the Maine beer industry, which has a wonderful record of working together to try to help each other out, as particularly in cases where it helps out everybody. Um, and so uh, that's something which is not always what comes to mind. Another possibility is, might you wish to integrate vertically? Meaning, uh, instead of buying some products or services from outside vendors, do some of that yourself, and in the process, um, offer more of the value-added chain to your customer. It doesn't have to be all of it, just a little more of it than you may offer right now. The ultimate question with all of this is, does the potential reward justify what will be an increased cost and an increased level of risk? If you decide the answer is no, then forget this slide. But I just wanted to mention this as a question that you may wish to ask yourself. Next up, build and use your team. Now, your team is probably more than you might have first thought when I mentioned the word team. I consider your team, and that's not just me, actually, many organizations consider your team to be a lot more than just your staff. Your team includes an attorney, if you have one, an accountant that you're working with, a banker that you're working with, your insurance agent, your business peers can be part of your team. Do you have somebody in your business from another state that you, or just out of your direct area of competition, that maybe you compare notes with once in a while, just to share experiences and wisdom to help each other out? That can be incredibly valuable, not just for commiseration, but for the information you get. So consider that. Any trade organizations that you're a member can also be a valuable resource, not only for information on how to deal with stresses that your business is experiencing recently, but also for ways to collaborate with others in your industry, perhaps through bulk purchasing agreements or things like that. And of course, as a SCORE mentor, I have to put in a pitch for work with your SCORE mentor. If you haven't already been doing so, brainstorming with somebody outside of day-to-day involvement in your business can often lead to ideas that you may find helpful and useful in your business. So, what concerns do you face about your team? Early on, someone mentioned finding and retaining staff is a challenge today, in part due to the high cost of living well, certainly along the coast, but even inland in Maine, things are going up. And housing is a huge challenge for many people you might like to employ. But training has often been another concern. Finding people that have the work ethic that you're looking for, or the motivation that you're looking for. finding people that are uh, not struggling with substance abuse. Uh, it can be critical in some industries, while other industries have embraced that and found a number of employees um, through that way. So yes, there are many concerns that it can arise as you try to retain the folks you have that you wish to retain, as well as find new people to join your team. Both are important. And today, in my opinion, you often need to market to your staff just as much as you market to your customers. What is it that your staff wants in this job, and how might you be able to provide that to them? That becomes just as important as what do your customers need and how will you provide that to them. So, as you think about your staff, resiliency and retention are both important. Retention, you spent all this time training somebody and they're a known quantity. They may not be perfect, but it's going to be a lot easier to keep them in many cases than it would be to lose them and have to try to find a successor for their role. The flip side is if things are changing quickly in your industry or in your business, how do you adapt to that? How can your business be resilient? If you lose an employee, can you make do with fewer staff? That's resiliency. Now, it's important that you have a sense of which staff members are key to your business. Who can you not afford to lose, and why can you not afford to lose them? If staff members are facing challenges, are the things that you're willing to do as a business owner, which you might be able to do to help them address their challenges? And in particular, uh, it's always important to be asking yourself, do your staff members find their work engaging and satisfying? If not, you probably are going to be at a greater risk of losing them to somebody else in due course. And then back to the resiliency point I made at the top of this slide. Are you cross-training your staff in key roles? What are the key things where if you lost a key person, you would really be up a creek without a paddle until you had their successor trained? Would it be possible to have somebody else in the business cross-trained to do that? Maybe one day a week, two people just switch roles just to stay fresh in that other person's role. Yeah, they may not be as efficient at it as the other person, but if somebody gets hit by a bus, you've got somebody who knows how to jump into that role. That can be critical to ensuring that your business can continue successfully until you can find that new person needed to fill the person who left, or until you can adapt to changes that you're facing in your marketplace. And don't overlook the external folks, because they are people who will step in occasionally and offer perhaps, hopefully, gems of wisdom that you might not have gotten from your staff. So thinking here about your attorney, your accountant, your business colleagues, etc., they can't offer their expertise to you unless they're familiar with what's happening in your business. So keep them in the loop. Catch up a couple of times a year, even if it's just an email you shoot in their direction saying, "Hey, FYI, this is what's happening in my business this month or this quarter." Um, no need for response. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. The goal of all of this is when they come across something that they say, "Oops, this is going to affect that person." Uh, you want your business to come to their mind so that they shoot you an email saying, "Oh, I just came across something that you should know about." Those external team members can be the eyes and ears for your business to help you become aware of external changes or even threats so that you learn about them sooner rather than later. In particular, for example, attorneys might help with law changes or rule changes or even policy changes if it's something that helps you about things in your employee handbook. Um, but your accountant can tell you about policy changes and best practices changes, and your HR consultant can as well. So all of these kinds of people are really useful to helping you stay on top of the changes that your business is likely to experience. Next up is legal and regulatory risk. For legal risks, many people may be undertaking legal risks that are a little different now than they were a year ago, in part because your company is a little different now than it was a year ago. So one way that many people reduce the legal risk with customers or with contractors is by having a formal contract that they sign with them. In particular, uh, if you're signing a contract with a customer, it's specifying what will be delivered in what time frame, at what price, with what sort of warranty or without warranty, and being very clear about the extent to which you stand or do not stand behind what you're providing them with. With contractors, it will be a series of very explicit things like the period of time for which you expect to be using them or for the project, exactly what's required of them, the rate at which you will pay them, when you will pay them, and perhaps also being very clear about whether they're a W-2 or a 1099 subcontractor. And if it's a 1099 subcontractor, your expectations for them to be, for example, maintaining similar work with other clients in order to make them truly a subcontractor. You can also reduce internal risks by having your employee policy handbook in which you document internal policies. And you should probably review your own handbook at least annually to make sure that you're following your internal policies. Because if you don't follow your own policies, you're opening yourself up for potential problems. So make sure that your employee handbook is up to date and make sure you're following it. Your employee handbook may have a bunch of policies for staff to follow, but you may also have a bunch of procedures for your staff to follow. And by that, I mean, if a customer comes in and says, I have a complaint about this product, what is it you wish your staff to do to respond to that complaint? Ideally, as you figure out the standard way you wish to respond, you will put that in writing and train all your staff on it so that all staff members will respond to a customer in a consistent way. Those procedures are not necessarily part of your employee handbook, but they are part of your business processes handbook. And it can be very useful to document them, put it in writing, and then review that periodically with people. Not necessarily all at once in one day and put people to sleep, but maybe once a week you just highlight one procedure that you want everybody to be following that people run into reasonably often. And that's an example of training your staff on company procedures, but there may be other things that you wish to train your staff on. And by training your staff to work in a consistent way for consistent situations, that can reduce your legal risks as well as improve customer satisfaction. And then lastly, as part of that, you may wish to be auditing what it is exactly your staff are doing to make sure that they really are following the procedures you set out and following the policies. Jen asks, what's meant by insure against them? Well, here you may be able to purchase insurance policies for a number of things that go wrong. That's something you'd have to talk to your insurance broker about. But a second thing you can also do is to self-insure, which is if you know that you have a liability exposure for a warranty you've offered on a product, you might establish a cash reserve in your business against future warranty claims. And then any costs you incur in meeting your warranty, you would just take out of that cash reserve that you'd put up against warranty claims. So that would be considered a form of self-insurance. But in general, if you are signing contracts with customers and contractors, they might sue you, in which case that could be something that you could have an insurance policy to help protect you against. Obviously, the higher the deductible, the lower your premium. So everybody debates how high deductible is reasonable for their business. Once you're in business and start to be successful, you might elect a higher deductible because you can afford to pay a greater outlay than you might have when you were new. I hope that answers your question. Specific requirements that can change, well, here's a laundry list, but your town or city might change what they require for business licenses, for approvals that you have to get, say, from the fire department, or occupancy permits, or zoning might change, or historic district overlays might change. If you're about to lease a new facility, don't forget to get consent from the landlord for the specific activities that you're going to be conducting in that facility. Building codes are important. That will usually come into play when you get your occupancy permit. Fire marshal will have an opinion. Once again, that'll usually go into play when you get your occupancy permit, or your fire marshal sign off on your use for the facility. Your town or city may change its taxes on businesses. In the town that I lived, it only taxed business assets once a year, but the tax rate could change, so you need to keep an eye on that. At the state or federal level, some businesses might require licenses. For example, the state of Maine is talking about starting to require contractors to be licensed. That's something that's never been the case in Maine before. Many businesses do not require a license in Maine, but some do. And so that's something to keep an eye on. If you have customers coming onto your premises, you need to make sure you're keeping up with the Americans with Disability Act, as well as for any employees that you have. Keep up with labor laws. Those seem to be constantly changing. Immigration laws have gotten much more difficult to comply with of late because we don't exactly know what's going on for some of them. So if you rely upon H-1B visas or other visas to staff either migrant labor or seasonal labor, that's become a huge challenge because we just don't know exactly how this is going to play out. They're talking about potentially changing Social Security and Medicare income tax withholding or not. I'll be interested to see how that progresses through the federal legislature. And then, of course, we always have sales tax. Will Maine need to change their sales tax in the future to make the budget balance or not, or what? Who knows? These are all things that could change and to keep an eye on. And this is a reason for, as I said earlier, keeping contact with your team writ large of people who might become aware of such potential changes before you do, and therefore might be able to send you a heads up that this is a change coming in your direction. Um, so, um, what regulatory risks, how might you better track your regulatory risks? Well, first of all, if you have an attorney, that's a great resource to just say, hey, have you heard of any regulatory changes that would affect my business? Your accountant might be aware of such things. If you have staff and use a payroll service provider, they will be a great resource for any changes to withholding requirements or employment documentation requirements. If you have an HR consultant, they are a great resource for your employee handbook, but also for anything you might talk to your payroll services company about. If you are purchasing product from abroad, then your customs broker would be a key resource for keeping you up to date on what the heck is happening this week. Not only in terms of dollars and cents, but in terms of timing. How long does it take for things to clear customs? How long is it expected to take to cross the ocean because shipping schedules are changing? Um, Also, don't forget about going to the IRS and the state of Maine websites. They have a lot of good information on them about regulations that are changing that you should be aware of. You can also talk to your town's code enforcement officer or fire chief to see if there are any recent regulatory changes there that might affect your business. Uh, some people say, no, no, I don't want to talk to them. I'm just, as long as they're not asking me questions, I'm not going to ask them any questions. Other people like to stay ahead of that and make sure they're aware of changes well before they're likely to affect them. And then lastly, your professional or trade association may be a very useful resource in helping you track changes that are likely to affect your whole industry, not just your business or your region. Uh, There are a wide variety of types of insurance you can choose to buy. You don't have to have all of these. That's your choice. But I do recommend that you talk to your insurance broker at least once a year and say to them, hey, what types of insurance do you recommend that I purchase? Because uh, my situation now is perhaps slightly different than it was a year ago. And let them know what's different. And based on the differences, they may turn around and say, it would be a really good idea for you to consider this type of policy, which I did not recommend to you last time. So um, their job is to recommend all the policies they can offer. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to buy them all, uh, but it's good to stay informed and aware of what your options are. And so by doing that, you at least know what the possibilities are should you wish to take advantage of them. Note that your insurance needs evolve over time. As a new business, you may not have been able to withstand much of a loss if something came along that could be an insurance claim. And so you might have signed up for a relatively low deductible because paying the higher premium was preferable to having to pay a larger deductible. The larger deductible might have put your business at risk. But if you've been profitable and have been able to perhaps start accumulating some reserves, then maybe you'd consider a larger deductible now in which, and now that you know more about your claim history, hopefully none, but and so maybe by having a larger deductible, you might be able to reduce your premiums going forward and therefore increase your profits. Or not. That's your call. But do re-examine your deductibles periodically, particularly if you've managed to generate some positive cash flow and are now in a strong cash positive position. Ask yourself what risks you can now afford to assume yourself. Um, The other thing, ask yourself is, are there any new risks that maybe you did not have a year ago that maybe you should be insuring yourself against? Or perhaps some policy limits should be raised. Instead of a $1 million umbrella policy, maybe you want a $2 million umbrella policy, either because you have more customers or customers are making larger purchases. It's always useful to review your insurance coverage with your agent, even if you don't change anything. Has anything changed for you in these areas recently? If so, please add them in the chat. I'd be interested in seeing what you have to say. Um, and last up in this area, if you are part of a partnership or a multi-member LLC, you should periodically review, and periodically, annually is not a bad period. You should review your operating agreement or partnership agreement. In particular, does it include the specific process that one of your partners or members would use to withdraw or retire from your organization? That should be specifically in there. If it's not, it could become a bone of contention if somebody says, I want to step away from the company. Is there a way for members or partners to remove another partner or member who just is not working out? In other words, against their will. How does that happen? That was another process you might want to consider putting in there. That would be easier to do if you have more than two members in your organization. You can say it's got to be a majority vote, but if you only have two members, maybe one is a 51% and the other was a 49% vote. How can a member or partner force the dissolution of the organization? So close down the company and pay out what's left of any assets to the members. That's something else that you might want to think about, specifying exactly how that could have happened and over what time frame it would happen in your agreement. Now, if any of these top three happen, inevitably that will lead to the question of, oh, well, my share of this organization is worth this much. Pay me. The process for determining the value of a partner or member's equity in the organization should be specified in your partnership or LLC operating agreement. If that process is not specified in there and you do break up, it is almost guaranteed to be a potential challenge and perhaps even a source of legal disagreement and a lot of expense. It's a lot cheaper to pay a lawyer now to work out a sound partnership agreement than it is to hire lawyers when there's a disagreement. So if you can value a partner's share of your company, how will you pay it out if they leave? It won't necessarily be in a lump sum the minute they leave. Your agreement might say something like it will be paid out in equal installments over so many years after they leave, or following some formula or pattern. That makes it easier on the company to be able to do that without running into a cash crunch itself. How would you approve or bring in new partners? Is there a price for them to buy into your company? Who has what vote? How is income distributed amongst members? And are those voting schemes and income distribution schemes still sensible today, even though they may have been perfectly reasonable when you last reviewed the agreement? All of these are less expensive and easier to review now before they become an issue than they will be once they become an issue. So if you're in a partnership, which I recognize is not a majority, but this is so important that if you're part of a partnership or multi-member LLC, and these items are not part of your operating agreement or your partnership agreement, please do review them and make sure that you amend your agreement to cover them. Next to last, maintain and use your financials. You don't have to be an accountant. You may have an accountant, you may have a bookkeeper, but you need to be using your financials to manage your business. And the most important thing you can do is to reconcile your books to your bank balance every month. That is absolutely critical. That ensures that your books reflect some semblance of reality. They may not be 100% correct, but at least you know it matches what's in your bank account. So if you're not comfortable reading your balance sheet or income statement, then become more comfortable doing that. All the underlined lines on this page are links that you can follow to some fairly short blog posts, which offer links to other resources to help you educate yourself on how to read your financial statements. They are your primary scorecard for your business. And if you're not comfortable looking them over quickly and in 10 to 20 minutes a month, deciding whether things are on target or not, then you're missing a key tool for you to manage your business more effectively. So you're not necessarily sitting down and doing a detailed analysis with lots of calculations. You're just doing a quick once over of your profit and loss sheet, your balance sheet, and you're looking for things that are odd. If you've been looking at them every month, anything odd is going to leap off the page very quickly. So don't feel you need to go through laborious calculations with the calculator. A lot of it is just looking for things that stick out like a sore thumb. However, having said that, it is always useful to examine your gross margin by business area versus history. Your gross margin being your revenues less your cost of goods sold. So that's before all your other expenses. But that gives you an idea of whether your gross profit margin, the amount you make on the sale of each item before you take into account overhead and marketing and sales expenses and utility expenses and depreciation, anything else, before all of those things, has your gross margin been steady? Has it been getting better? Or has it been eroding? If prices start going up from your suppliers, your gross margin will erode unless you also raise your prices. Is that acceptable or not? That's for you to decide. But if you see your gross margin changing month over month, you have a decision to make. Is it time for you to change your prices to hopefully counteract much or all of that gross margin erosion or not? And if you sell some very different kinds of products or services, you may wish to look at gross margin by each type of product or by each type of service, because looking at it as a whole might hide changes that are happening for one service or the other. By comparing that to last month, the month before, this time last year, that gives you a quick basis for comparison that lets you figure out whether there's something that you need to look into there or not. If gross margin has eroded, your first question is, can you raise your prices to compensate? Or perhaps you can reduce your cost of goods sold to compensate by changing suppliers, by asking your supplier to reduce their prices if they can, and so on. If they cannot reduce or will not reduce their prices, then maybe you have to raise your prices. And in general, my recommendation is don't wait too long to raise prices, because if prices are due to inflation, it's going to continue. And it's going to be easier for you to raise your price 0.5% now and 1% in 4 months than it will be to raise them by 3% or 5% in a year's time. So particularly in inflationary times, watch your gross margin. And if it's getting worse because the cost of goods is increasing, examine whether you can keep the cost of goods under control, and if not, raise your prices in tandem with them if you can. Your competition's probably going to be facing the same thing. So keep an eye on their prices and raise your prices as soon as you can. And if you can, in looking at your financials, compare your financial ratios to industry averages. If you have a relationship with a bank, your bank may have access to databases that can provide you with industry standard averages for your industry, and that gives you something to compare your financial ratios to. Different businesses will use different ratios, different metrics. That's fine. Ones that are often used across just about any business include gross margin, which I was just talking about. Also, your net margin, namely what your net profit is divided by your revenues after all expenses have been factored in. Your return on assets, that would be your net profit divided by your assets, not just your revenues. That's a basis that many people use to compare one business to another. Not just how much they make on the revenues they earn, but how much they make on the assets that they make use of. How much machinery, how many trucks, that sort of thing are needed to generate that revenue. Inventory turnover is generally your sales revenues divided by your inventory. And that gives you a day's inventory kind of number, or a month's inventory kind of number. And that would be a number that you could compare to your industry standard. You can look at your accounts receivable divided by your revenues to come up with days sales outstanding. And that gives you an idea of how quickly or slowly you're collecting any accounts receivable due to you. Once again, they're typically industry standards for these measures that you might get some help finding from your bank or your trade association. For whatever metrics like these or others that you follow for your business, it's a great idea to look at them every month, because if you're just in the habit of doing that, it doesn't take very long to quickly review them and say, yep, everything's good, or, ooh, there's something I should look into a little more closely. That's the objective of reviewing your financials, to identify things you need to look at a little more closely. In particular, pay careful attention to which of your expenses are fixed and which are variable. Fixed expenses tend not to vary with your revenues. If your sales doubled, fixed expenses won't double. They might change a little, but they're not going to be anything close to doubling. On the other hand, variable expenses do tend to change with revenues. If your sales double, your variable expenses might be close to doubling or more. So, for example, if you pay commissions on sales, that is very definitely a variable expense. On the other hand, the salary you pay your receptionist is very definitely a fixed expense. Your rent is a fixed expense. But if you're a manufacturing business, your utility expenses, your electricity and natural gas might be variable expenses, because they might vary considerably with your volume of revenue. So the reason for carefully differentiating between fixed and variable expenses is that in tough times, it's often fixed expenses that drown a company. If you can control your fixed expenses, do. If your lease is coming up for renewal and you've got a bit more space than you need and a bit more than you think you're going to need for the next year, maybe you want to consider leasing a smaller space with a smaller monthly rent just to reduce your fixed expenses. If you're about to maybe buy something, a new piece of equipment for your business, consider renting it instead if you can terminate the lease early. Because A, by renting it, you don't part with all of your cash right now. And B, maybe it's an expense, as I said a minute ago, you could get out of if times get tough. And the other thing to think about, particularly in light of the uncertainty that several of you have voiced about current times, if you don't already have some sort of a cash reserve, think about trying to establish one if you can. Well, how much should I have is the inevitable next question. And my answer to that is what bank balance helps you sleep well at night? For some businesses, that might be, oh, if I've got 500 bucks in the bank, I'm good. And for other businesses, it might be, oh, if I've got 500,000 in the bank, then I'm good, or anything in between. So that's not a have to, obviously, but one other thing to keep in mind is instead of having a cash reserve from profits, you could, if you've not already, apply for a line of credit from your bank. There'll be a relatively reasonable, a few $100 kind of annual fee, depending on the size of the line of credit, um, in exchange for knowing that you always have a loan you can draw upon, typically within 24 hours notice. If you need 10,000 bucks, you can get it tomorrow. You'll only pay interest on what you borrowed, and the minute you repay it, the interest stops. So a cash reserve may not be something you can build, but if you qualify for a line of credit from your bank, maybe that can serve the same purpose as a cash reserve, and knowing it's there helps you sleep better at night. So I invite you to put any particular topics related to your financials that concern you in the chat, and I'll be happy to try to address them, assuming that I have opinions on them. In particular, current financial risks include tariffs, and I've already mentioned this several times. Do you have alternatives to foreign suppliers? Because any foreign supplier is potentially subject to tariffs these days. But the flip side is domestic suppliers, if they can be found, may not necessarily be any cheaper than the foreign supplier after tariffs. So there's so many unknowns that right now we all have to sit on our hands and wait for more things to be known before we can make decisions. And for some companies, that may mean that they risk running out of inventory because they're waiting for these things to become better known. That's up to you to decide, is that a risk you can and wish to take or not? And it's not an easy decision. Secondly, cash flow. Look very carefully at your monthly cash flow. How much cash is your business generating every month? What's changing about your bank balance? Is it growing every month? Then you're generating cash. Is it shrinking every month? Then you're using cash. In general, if your margins deteriorate, if your gross margin deteriorates, or your net profit deteriorates, your cash flow is going to suffer. So you'll find that your bank balance goes down by less every month or starts declining. Sorry, goes up by less every month or starts declining. In many cases, the first thing to look at is fixed costs, and preferably look at fixed costs before this starts to happen, because it often takes time to change your fixed costs. That's why they're called fixed. Secondly, look at all your offerings. It's possible that some of your products or services are no longer profitable. In which case, do you want to change your price on them, or do you wish to discontinue offering them completely? Maybe you want to talk to some of your customers and say, hey, look, I'm now losing money on this. Would you go to a competitor if I raise my price, or would you keep coming to me? And if most of your customers say I go to a competitor, then perhaps you discontinue offering that, which is going to hit your cash flow. But perhaps that's better than continuing to lose a little money every month. So Do try to analyze your financials by product or service if you can. And if you cannot, maybe that's a message that maybe you need to start collecting your data in a way that will, in the future, allow you to analyze things by product or service a little better than you can now. Do try to forecast your cash flow. Once again, this is something the first time you do it, it takes a while and it's a pain. But once you get used to doing it, it's probably something between half an hour and a couple of hours work. If you do it once a quarter, twice a year, that's not too much of an imposition. And by doing a forecast out at least 6 months, preferably 12 months or more, you can anticipate any cash flow challenges that you might encounter. If you see your ending bank balance starting to decline 3 months from now and you don't have a line of credit, maybe now is the time to apply for the line of credit if that's going to be something seasonal, that the minute your high season comes again, that all goes away. Okay, cool. But if that's not seasonal, if it's not going away, then you need to change something more fundamental about your business. And that's why I say the cash flow forecast will help you determine if any changes you might be able to make to your business will fully address the issue of declining cash flow. And lastly, it helps you determine if you might need a loan. And if you apply for a loan, your cash flow forecast will be something that the lender wants to see in order to figure out how much of a loan you can support. And they're probably going to want to see a forecast that goes out 12 months so they get a sense of the cyclicality of your business over the course of the year. Some businesses are cyclical, some are not. And lastly, look ahead. I've mentioned some of these things before, but try to be aware of upcoming regulatory or licensing changes, ones that have not happened yet. If you can start anticipating them and setting your business up to be ready for them in advance of when they apply, it's going to be less stressful and easier for you. Monitor your gross margin. This is critical. I already belabored the point previously. Perhaps ask your long-term vendors for better pricing or terms if you can. If you can't, you might have to change your pricing. Monitor your net margin, your profit. And if that's declining, but gross margin is the same, maybe what's happening is some of your fixed and other variable costs that are not part of the gross margin calculation have changed. And that means you need to go look at them to find a better way of controlling them in order to restore your profitability to your business. And if you anticipate growing, that's great, but growth often takes money. And so a cash flow forecast is a really useful tool if you're trying to plan for growth. Do you need to buy more inventory? If so, how much more? And how far in advance of the revenues are you going to need to have the inventory on hand? And therefore, will you have to pay for it? So growth is good, but it does impose a number of financial requirements, and you want to make sure that you've anticipated those before you start embarking upon that growth path. And your cash flow forecast is a great way to do that. Thinking ahead, once again, as part of a cash flow forecast, what changes do you anticipate to staffing, to training of your staff, to equipment you're using, to the location or locations that you're using? Are any of these things that you're thinking of changing in the next year? In which case, include those changes in your cash flow forecast. Do you anticipate changing the products or services you're selling? Do you anticipate serving new markets or fewer markets? All of those are things that you should include in your thinking as you sit down to do a cash flow forecast. And some hopefully supportive words for you. Your cash flow forecast does not have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be complicated. And it is not going to be perfect. No cash flow forecast is ever perfect. So don't kill yourself trying to make sure the numbers are right. They're not going to be right. I can guarantee that. They just have to be an informed series of guesses. I advocate that you forecast your revenues first. And the reason for that is because if you know what your total expenses are going to be, it's miraculous how often your revenue forecast turns out to exceed your expenses. Whereas if you'd forecast revenues first, it's as realistic as you can make it. And if it turns out that expenses exceed revenues, that's a message you would like to know now, not later. Your revenue forecast is often the most complex part of your forecast. Don't hesitate to use a separate spreadsheet just to forecast your revenues in whatever way it makes sense for your business to forecast revenues. But when it comes to expenses, you'll often find that errors in forecasting expenses will tend to offset one another. You're a little too high in one, a little too low in another. Most expense forecasts come in within about 10% of the real number if you've tried to be as reasonable as you can in your forecast. So don't hesitate to lump a bunch of expense categories together. To exaggerate, there's no need to forecast paper clips separately from thumbtacks, separately from pencils, separately from pens, etc. Just have an office supplies number and try to forecast that number. You can use that same principle, say, with utilities and other things like that often. When you sit down to do a forecast, I encourage people to do monthly forecasts. It's a bit more work, but I think they get you better insights, particularly about the seasonality of your business. If monthly is just too much work, okay, fine, do a quarterly forecast. That's better than nothing. But if you can, I advocate monthly forecasts. And the point of the whole thing is just to make sure that your cash does not run low at some point during the months that you're looking forward to try to forecast. If you're looking for a reasonably simple template for a cash flow forecast, here's a link to a template that's you can use for up to a 3-year forecast. Each year is on one page, so you can see a whole year at a time. And it's literally one page, top to bottom as well. So it won't have you scrolling and scrolling and scrolling to get through the whole forecast. And we can help if you have questions. So those are the topics that came to my mind. Are there any topics that I have not raised that you are concerned about? Marnie says, I've referenced a few links today, but I'm unsure how to access them. You will receive probably in a couple of days a copy of the slide deck and a link to recording of this. The slide deck will be a PDF where all the links will stay live. And so you can click on those links in the slide deck. If that's not good enough, then let me know and we'll figure out something else. I can send you the slide deck sooner. Are there any other questions that people have? Feel free to put them in the chat while I go on my last couple of slides here. I'm happy to stick around and answer further questions or just discuss things, even if it's not a question I can answer. But before I get on to that, I want to mention that in case you're not familiar with SCORE, we offer free mentoring and workshops. We're all volunteers here. We're a nonprofit. We're a partner of the Small Business Administration. We have about 320 offices throughout the United States, and we are the largest volunteer business mentoring organization in the United States. If you wish to sign up for Mentor and don't already have one, you can scan this QR code and that will take you to a website which will let you sign up for mentoring. Our motto is we're here for the life of your business. Most of the clients I meet with, I hope that we will meet more than once or twice, that we will continue to meet as their business evolves and grows. We're here to provide support, and we're not just individuals. I can call upon any mentor elsewhere in the United States to co-mentor via Zoom with you and hopefully provide expertise that maybe I don't have that you're looking for. So we're a pretty wide-ranging resource, and we do it because it's fun and interesting for us. We learn something new every day ourselves, and that's what keeps it interesting for us. So we welcome new clients and look forward to working with you if we're not already. That's the end of my slide deck. I'm happy to revisit any particular slides if you wish me to, or if there are other topics that I did not touch upon in my attempt to provide generic advice to, well, I didn't know who was going to show up. So, other questions? Well, I'm not seeing any in the chat. I'm not hearing anybody in the workshop. So I guess this is my cue to thank you all for attending, and I offer our thanks again to TD Charitable for helping to underwrite our workshop series. And I look forward to seeing you in a future workshop or perhaps in a mentoring session. You never know. Stay warm today and dry, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thanks again for joining us for this workshop.